Eyes in the shadows. It was a howling mountain pass, the wind rife with a haunting melody, as if it were almost human. Sophia pulled her coat tightly around her as the cold crept into her bones. Beside her, Marcus trudged on, his flashlight cutting into the oppressive darkness. "This path isn't on the map," Marcus whispered, looking at the tattered edges of an old hand-drawn map he had discovered in his grandfather's attic. "Perhaps that's why," Sophia said, her voice laced with unease. She kept her eyes fixed on the trees, their skeletal branches twisting against the moonlight. It started as a dare, a challenge to discover the truth behind the legend of the cursed forest. Locals whispered about an ancient evil that lurked within, a shadowy figure watching and waiting for intruders. To Marcus, it was an opportunity for adventure. To Sophia, it was a mistake she deeply regretted. The trees grew denser as they ventured deeper. The path beneath their feet became uneven, littered with roots that seemed to grasp at their ankles. The sound of their breathing and the crunch of leaves beneath their boots were the only noises in the suffocating silence. After hours of walking, they stumbled upon an open clearing. In its center stood a stone altar, weathered by the time, but still emitting a strange glow. Cryptic symbols, etched into its surface, pulsed with this otherworldly energy. Marcus approached it, for his curiosity outweighed the fear. "It is just like the stories," he whispered, running fingers over the carvings. Sophia lingered behind, grasping her flashlight tightly like a lifeline. "Marcus, this is serious. We should leave." But Marcus was hypnotized by an ancient book lying amidst its papers and a few sheets of a map on it. It was one in the bag, aged along with the cover from leathers. He said the old book had a message of some sort. Its archaic language read. As Marcus read aloud from the journal, a sudden gust of wind extinguished Sophia's flashlight. Darkness enveloped them, broken only by the faint glow of the altar. "Marcus," Sophia hissed, panic rising in her chest. "Stop reading." But it was too late. The air grew heavy, and a low, guttural whisper echoed through the clearing. The shadows around them seemed to shift, forming vague humanoid shapes that swayed with the wind. Marcus pulled away, his voice breaking. "Do you hear that?" Sophia nodded, her grip on his arm tightening. "We should leave, now." The voices were growing louder, becoming more distinct, as if voices from the abyss called their names. Marcus thrust the journal into his pack, and they ran back the way they had come toward the path. It was a chaotic escape. The once familiar path now had turned into a maze, with the trees forming an unbreakable cordon. The shadows were not merely shapes, they were life, with glowing eyes boring holes into the night. Sophia tripped on a root and fell. Her knees scraped on the ground as she scrambled up. Marcus pulled her along, but it had made them fall behind. A shadowy figure lunged forward at them, reaching out with its clawed hand. A blinding light burst from the pouch. The journal seemed to respond to the presence of the shadow, its emanation forcing the figure back. "Good Lord!" Sophia exhaled. "What in the world is that?" Marcus didn't respond. He seized the journal, holding it up, sending the light streaming outwards to envelop them. "We need to find shelter," he said, his voice steady, though his eyes betrayed fear. It had felt like an eternity, and they finally stumbled upon this old cabin hidden in the trees. The door creaked open as they pushed it open, revealing a room filled with dusty furniture and cobwebs. Sophia collapsed onto a rickety chair, her breathing ragged. "What is happening, Marcus?" Marcus laid the book down on the table and started reading through its pages. "I don't know, but this book, it's related to those things out there." As he read through, he came across a passage that stated the history of the forest. The altar was created hundreds of years ago by a lost cult that was worshipping the shadows. They considered the shadows ancient guardians, and the book to be a guide for the summoning and control of them. Sophia's voice quivered. You mean we let them loose? Marcus nodded grimly. And I think they want the journal back. There was a sudden thump on the cabin door. The shadows had found them. The windows rattled and the whispers became deafening. Now words. Give it back, the voices demanded in unison. Sophia clutched a lantern she had found in the cabin. It was old, but still functional. Lighting it, she discovered its flame emitted the same eerie glow as the altar. They're afraid of the light, Marcus realized. Using the lantern's glow, they managed to hold the shadows at bay. But the whispers continued, promising doom if they didn't return the journal to the altar. As the dawn was approaching, the shadows were retreating. But Marcus and Sophia knew that this was only temporary. They had to make a choice: return the journal and risk awakening something worse, or destroy it and hope to sever the connection. Sophia's hands trembled as she held the lantern. What if destroying it only makes them angrier? Marcus stared at the journal, his mind racing. Then we'll fight. We have to end this, one way or another. The sun rose, casting its light over the forest, but the sense of dread remained. They knew the forest would not let them go so easily. The pale moonlight barely penetrated the dense canopy of the forest as Marcus and Sophia stood by the ancient well. The air was unnaturally still, as though the forest held its breath, waiting. The well itself was a decrepit structure of crumbling stones, its depths swallowed by darkness. A faint, almost imperceptible sound, like whispers carried on the wind, seemed to emanate from within. Marcus raised the yellowed map Edward had given them, its edges frayed and corners smudged. The manuscript is supposed to be buried near this well, he whispered, his voice low, as though speaking louder might awaken the forest itself. Sophia glanced around uneasily. I don't like this. That cry we heard earlier. What if it wasn't an animal? Marcus did not answer right away. His eyes were attracted to the well. Leaning closer, he could see that the stones were covered with strange symbols he had seen on the cover of the manuscript in Edward's records. They seemed ancient, far older than the well itself. These markings. Marcus traced them with his fingers, his voice tinged with awe. They're pre-Christian, possibly pagan. Whoever built this well did so on sacred ground. Sophia took a step back, her instincts screaming at her to leave. Sacred or cursed? Marcus looked up, his expression serious. That's what we're here to find out. Before either of them could move further, a sudden rustling broke the silence. Both froze. Marcus instinctively reached for the flashlight strapped to his bag. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing, just trees and shadows. Sophia exhaled sharply. This place is playing tricks on us. But Marcus wasn't so sure. He returned his attention to the well, pulling out a small chisel and hammer from his satchel. If the manuscript is here, it might be hidden beneath the stones. Sophia's protests were cut short by a soft sound. It was like someone, or something, was whispering her name. She turned sharply, her heart pounding, but saw only shadows. Marcus, did you hear that? Hear what? Marcus replied, focused on loosening one of the well's stones. Someone whispered my name. Her voice was barely above a whisper itself. Marcus paused, finally looking up. The forest was silent once again, but the tension in the air was oppressive. Stay close, he said, his voice firmer now. Whatever you think you heard, it's just the wind. Sophia wasn't convinced, but she nodded, staying within arm's reach as Marcus pried the stone loose. Beneath it lay a hollow space, and within that space, a small leather-bound journal, its cover cracked with age. Marcus's eyes lit up with excitement as he retrieved it. This must be it, he said, opening the journal carefully. The pages were brittle, filled with faded ink and more of the strange symbols. Sophia leaned in, her unease momentarily overridden by curiosity. "Can you read it?" "Not here," Marcus said, his voice barely containing his excitement. "The light's too poor and the air is damp. We need to get back to the inn." But as he tucked the journal into his satchel, the whispers returned, louder this time. They didn't sound like the wind anymore. They sounded human, yet not entirely. Their journey back to the inn was anything but boring. The path seemed to change, turning them round in circles. Trees that had appeared to be immobile started to lean in, seemingly observing them. The whispers persisted, louder, almost demanding. At one moment, Marcus halted abruptly. "Do you see that?" he asked, pointing forward. Sophia followed his gaze and felt her blood run cold. In the distance, barely visible through the mist, was a figure. It stood motionless, cloaked in shadows, its glowing eyes fixed on them. "What is that?" Sophia whispered, her voice trembling. Marcus didn't answer. He grabbed her hand and began to walk faster. The figure didn't follow, but its presence lingered in their minds long after it had disappeared. As they finally reached the inn, the feeling was overwhelming. But as they entered, Edward was there, his expression grim. "You shouldn't have gone there," he said, his voice low. "The well isn't just a relic, it's a doorway. You've stirred something that was better left alone." Marcus placed the journal on the counter. "This journal, what do you know about it?" Edward hesitated, then sighed. "It belonged to Julian Cross. He was a scholar, much like you, who came here 2 centuries ago. He was looking for answers too. But all he found was madness." Sophia furrowed her brow. "What do you mean?" Edward leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "He wrote about the forest, about the things that live in its shadows. He claimed they weren't spirits but something older, something that has been here long before us." That night, back in the safety of their own room, Marcus and Sophia started going through the journal. The first few pages were jumbled, full of notes and drawings of the woods. But as they moved further through the pages, the writing became increasingly jagged, the sketches ugly. One page stood out in particular, a clumsy drawing of the well and surrounding it, shadowy figures with glowing eyes. Below it, a single line was scrawled in a shaky hand. "They watch. They wait. Do not let them see you." Sophia shuddered. "What does it mean?" Marcus shook his head. "I don't know, but we're going to find out." As the clock struck midnight, a loud knock echoed through the inn. Both of them froze. Slowly, Marcus approached the door and opened it. No one was there, but on the floor lay one thing, a lantern, its glass cracked, its light faint and fitful. Tied to the handle was a note scrawled in the same uncertain hand as the journal. "The light won't save you." The flickering lantern sat between Marcus and Sophia, its faint light casting eerie shadows on the room's walls. Marcus held the cracked glass carefully, examining the note attached to the handle. "The light won't save you." The words repeated in his mind like some kind of sinister chant. Sophia's face was white, her hands shaking as she held the journal close to her chest. "Who could have left this? Nobody followed us back from the forest." Marcus set the lantern down on the table and rubbed his hair back, frustration mounting. "I don't know, but it's no coincidence. Someone or something wants us to stop." Sophia put the journal on the table and opened it to the page with the ominous drawing of the well. The shadowy figures seemed to leap from the page, their glowing eyes staring directly into her soul. "Do you think these things are real?" Marcus hesitated. He wanted to dismiss it all as paranoia, but the whispers, the figure in the forest, and now this lantern were too much to ignore. "I don't know what to believe anymore, but we can't let fear stop us." Sophia's gaze softened. "And what if it's not fear? What if it's a warning? Before Marcus could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall outside their room. They froze, exchanging nervous glances. The inn was empty except for Edward, and these footsteps were far too heavy to belong to the frail old man. A knock rattled the door, sharp and insistent. Marcus grabbed a poker from the fireplace and motioned for Sophia to stay behind him. Slowly, he opened the door. Standing there was a man, tall and gaunt, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His clothes were old-fashioned, his boots caked with mud. "You've seen the journal," he said, his voice gravelly and low. Marcus tightened his grip on the poker. "Who are you?" The man stepped inside uninvited, his movements deliberate and calm. "The question isn't who I am, but what you've unleashed." Sophia took a step forward, her fear mixing with curiosity. "What do you mean?" The man pulled off his hat, showing hollow cheeks and eyes that seemed far too old for his face. "The well wasn't meant to be disturbed. The forest watches over it, and now that you've drawn its attention, it won't stop until it gets what it wants." Marcus snorted. "And what does it want?" The stranger's eyes fell on Marcus, his face stern. "To keep its secrets." The stranger said his name was Elias, a scholar who had once come to the well seeking its secrets, just like Marcus. He said that the lantern was not a normal light, but a talisman to protect him. "The well and the forest flourish in darkness," Elias said. "This lantern will weaken their hold, but it won't save you completely." Marcus studied the lantern closer still, and he saw in the metal etchings a faint line of writing, like those on the journal, like those on the well. "How does it work?" Elias frowned. "It can throw them off for a bit, but it won't stop them if they decide to keep coming. The forest has waited centuries for someone like you, a scholar, a seeker." Sophia's voice had trembled. "Why us?" "Because you have what they need," Elias said, gesturing to the journal. "Knowledge. They fear it as much as they crave it. The more you read, the closer they'll come." Sophia gripped the journal tightly, protectively. "Then we should destroy it." Elias shook his head vehemently. Destroying it would unleash them fully. The journal is a key, but it's also a lock. You must learn enough to understand how to stop them, but not so much that you open the door entirely. That night, sleep was impossible. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, filling the room with an unnatural hum. Marcus sat at the table, the journal splayed open before him. His eyes scanned the pages, deciphering the cryptic symbols and faded notes. Sophia sat nearby, her arms wrapped around herself as she stared at the flickering lantern. "I found something," Marcus said, breaking the silence. Sophia looked up, her eyes weary. "What is it?" Marcus pointed to a page with a detailed map of the forest. "There's another site marked here, deeper in the woods. It's labeled the altar." Sophia shook her head. "Number absolutely not. We barely made it out of the forest last time." Marcus's jaw tightened. "If we don't understand what we're dealing with, we won't survive. The answers are out there." Sophia stood, her voice rising in anger. "And what if it's a trap? What if they're luring us in?" Before Marcus could respond, the whispers suddenly stopped. The silence was deafening, oppressive. Then, from the shadows, a single word echoed, clear and chilling. "Altar!" The lantern's flame danced wildly across the room, casting shadows and darkness in its spasms. When it settled, Marcus and Sophia saw something that made their blood run cold. A handprint on the open page of the journal, black and ashen. Elias appeared at dawn, his countenance grave. "The forest is calling you," he said. "You have two choices: to ignore it and risk its wrath, or go to the altar and face what awaits." Sophia turned to Marcus, her eyes pleading. "We can leave. Forget about the journal, the well, all of it." Marcus shook his head. If we run, it'll follow us. We need to end this. Elias nodded. Then take the lantern. It's your only protection. With heavy hearts, Marcus and Sophia prepared for their journey into the heart of the forest. As they stepped outside, the morning sun offered little comfort. The forest loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, its secrets waiting to be uncovered. And as they walked toward the altar, the whispers began again. The forest seemed to come alive as Marcus, Sophia, and Elias ventured deeper into its shadowy embrace. The twisted and ancient trees formed a canopy so dense that sunlight barely penetrated, and every step was accompanied by the crunch of dead leaves and the occasional rustle of unseen creatures. Sophia gripped the lantern tightly, its faint glow being the only thing giving off an aura of safety. "Are we even going in the right direction?" she asked, her voice quivering. Elias looked at the map, his hands shaking. "The altar is just up ahead," he said. But his tone spoke of uncertainty, as if he was afraid of what they might find. Marcus clutched the journal, its pages flapping in the cold wind. He looked at Sophia, her pale face etched with fear, and then at Elias, whose gaze darted nervously between the trees. "Keep moving," Marcus urged. After hours of navigating the labyrinthine forest, they reached a clearing. In the center stood a massive stone structure, overgrown with moss and vines. The altar was unlike anything Marcus had imagined. Its surface was etched with the same cryptic symbols as the journal and the lantern. Sophia hesitated, her instincts screaming at her to turn back. "This place. It feels wrong," she whispered. Elias moved closer to the altar, his face stern. "It's not just a place. It's a gateway." Marcus put the journal on the altar, matching the symbols of the journal with those etched into the stone. The air thickened, charged with an unnatural energy. "What now?" he asked. Before Elias could answer, a low hum began to emanate from the altar. The symbols started to glow dimly, pulsating like a heartbeat. The forest fell silent. Even the wind ceased to move. Then, from the fringes of the clearing, shadows began to stretch. They moved across the ground as if alive. They combined to form human bodies. Their eyes glowed like glowing embers. They pierced the darkness through. Sophia clutches the lantern with its unevenly flared light. "They are here," she barely whispers. Elias stepped back, his face pale. "The altar has awakened them." Marcus scanned the shadows, his heart pounding. "What do they want?" Elias shook his head. "To protect the secrets and to claim those who dare to uncover them." The shadows moved closer, their forms more distinct. They whispered in an ancient tongue, the voices like the rustling of dead leaves. The young boy unexpectedly reached over to grasp the journal, holding it high above the altar. "There's only one way to stop them," he said. Marcus stepped forward, alarmed. "What are you doing?" Elias faced him, his eyes desperately serious. "The journal is the key. Destroying it might sever their connection to this world." Sophia shook her head. "But you said destroying it would unleash them completely." Elias hesitated, his fingers tightening on the journal. "That was before. Now we have no choice." Before anyone could stop him, Elias hurled the journal into the center of the altar. The stone cracked, and a burst of blinding light exploded out. The shadows recoiled, their forms disintegrating into the air. For a moment, it seemed the nightmare was over, but the respite was short. The floor beneath the altar started rumbling, and a guttural roar thundered in from the woods. A sickly red light overwhelmed the altar's gentle light. Marcus grabbed Sophia's arm, saying, "Run!" They ran toward the forest boundary. The shadows re-atomized and chased after them like terrifying speed demons. Their lantern's faint flickers of light kept them temporarily at bay. Elias lagged behind, his old legs unable to keep pace. He stumbled, falling to the ground as the shadows closed in. "Go!" he shouted. "Save yourselves!" Sophia screamed, but Marcus pulled her forward. "We can't stop! He knew the risks!" As they reached the edge of the clearing, the shadows enveloped Elias. His cries echoed through the forest, then fell silent. Marcus and Sophia emerged from the forest, their breaths ragged, their bodies trembling. They collapsed onto the grass, the lantern's light finally steadying. Sophia looked back at the forest, tears streaming down her face. "We left him," she said, her voice choked with guilt. Marcus gazed at the lantern, its light reflected in his haunted eyes. "He made his choice," he said, but his tone was hollow, as if trying to convince himself. They knew the forest wasn't done with them. The altar's curse had been unleashed, and the journal's destruction had only bought them time. As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, Marcus and Sophia realized the truth. The forest had marked them, and there was no escaping its grasp. The sun's rays pierced the sky, but their warmth felt distant to Marcus and Sophia as they stumbled into the nearest town. Their clothes were torn, their faces pale, and their eyes held the weight of unspeakable horrors. Sophia clung to the lantern as if it were the last shred of hope. Its glow had dimmed considerably, yet it pulsed faintly, a heartbeat in sync with the forest they had escaped. Marcus collapsed onto the cobblestone street, gasping for air. "We need help," he muttered. Sophia looked around, scanning the charming village with her eyes. The streets were weirdly deserted, and the silence weighed on her chest. One lonely church steeple stood out in the distance, its bell tolling mournfully. An old man appeared from a house nearby. His face was etched with lines of worry, and he came forward with caution, darting his eyes between Marcus and Sophia. "You have come from the forest, haven't you?" he asked, his voice grave. Marcus nodded. We found the altar, and we destroyed the journal." The old man's face grew darker. "Fools, you've unleashed only what was bound." Sophia stepped forward, her voice trembling. "We had no choice. The shadows, they were going to kill us." The old man sighed and waved for them to enter behind him. Inside his dimly lit home, he found an ancient tome and laid it out on the table. Its leather cover had those same cryptic symbols they saw on the altar. "This village has lived under the forest shadow for centuries," he said. "The altar isn't just a gateway, it's a seal. The journal was part of that seal, and now it's gone." Marcus cut off the old man's flow. "How do we stop it?" "There has to be a way." Old man hesitated. "There is only one way to appease the curse. A sacrifice must be made, a willing one." Sophia's hands were trembling as she held the lantern. "A sacrifice? You mean one of us?" The old man nodded. "The forest marks its victims. It doesn't let go until its price is paid." Marcus clenched his fists, his mind racing. "There has to be another way. We can't just give in to this madness." The old man opened the tome, revealing a sketch of the altar surrounded by shadowy figures. "The lantern you carry, it's the key to completing the rite. But its light will only hold the shadows at bay for so long." Sophia stared at the flickering lantern. "What happens if we don't make the sacrifice?" The old man's eyes were filled with a deep sadness. "Then the curse spreads. The shadows will leave the forest and consume everything in their path." With no other option, Marcus and Sophia were ready to head back to the forest. The old man handed them the book and gave them a final warning. "The forest will test you. It will try to break you. But remember, the sacrifice must be willing. If it isn't, the curse will only grow stronger." The journey back was gruesome. The forest seemed alive, reaching out to them with branches that looked like skeletal hands. The air was filled with the stench of decay, and the shadows grew closer with every step. Sophia held the lantern high, its glow weak but steady. Marcus carried the tome, the pages filled with cryptic instructions for the final rite. when they arrived at the clearing. The altar was aglow with an evil red light. The shadows crept around it, their whispers a cacophony of fear. Marcus set the tome on the altar and opened it to the final page. The instructions were clear, but the implications were horrifying. Sophia read aloud, her voice trembling. The marked one must step into the light willingly, offering their life to seal the gateway. Marcus gazed at her, his face pale. "It's me, isn't it? The forest marked me when I first touched the journal." Sophia shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "No, we'll find another way. We always do." But Marcus knew there was no escaping this. He stepped toward the altar, the shadows parting to let him through. "Take care of yourself," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "And make sure this never happens again." As he stepped into the light, the shadows surged forward to engulf him. The red glow intensified, and the whispers became deafening. Sophia screamed, but it was too late. The light consumed Marcus, and the shadows vanished. The forest was silent. The altar was dark, its powers extinguished. Sophia fell down on her knees, hanging onto the lantern, light gone. She walked slowly out of the forest, filled with grief. When she made it back to the village, the old man was still waiting. "It is done," he said. "The forest will sleep again." Sophia nodded, but her heart was shattered. She knew the curse was only dormant, waiting for the next foolhardy soul to awaken it. As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, Sophia looked back at the forest one last time. Its shadows seemed deeper, as if it was watching her. The secrets of the forest were locked away for now, but some doors, once opened, can never be closed.